friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a card for you using Hello Bluebird's Balloon Buddies and Tree Neighbors. So I've stamped all those images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. I'm also going to be using some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Good Stuff 6x8 pattern paper pad to choose my color palette. I'm going to use this one with the little confetti in the background. So I'm going to tuck that under my cardstock panel so I can pull my color palette from that, and I will be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm going to start with my two foxes, and I'm going to use my favorite color combo for foxes, which is YR12, YR14, and YR18. So the one that I'm coloring right now is from Tree Neighbors, and the other guy is from the Balloon Buddies set. But because they are drawn by the same illustrator, I think all of these sets just work so well together, and I thought they would be fun to combine on today's card. So I am starting with my darkest shade, the YR18. I typically like to color darkest to lightest, and I'm using that to lay in my shadows on this first fox. This is going to be my girl fox. So I use that YR18 mostly down the left side of her body. I like to keep the face nice and light, just so that you're able to see their features a little better. So I typically put the highlight on the face if I can help it. And so the shadows are going down the back side of her body, which is the left side, underside of the tail, underside of the arm, any place where the light wouldn't hit. I did also add just a bit of a shadow to the bridge of her nose just to accentuate that a little bit more as well. And because it's kind of tipped up like that, it would cast the top of her face in a little bit of shadow. So I blended out with the YR14 and then the YR12 I used for my highlight, and then I went back in with a second layer of the coloring. This just helps to really smooth out your blend of your markers. It creates a bit of a more seamless transition from shade to shade, and it also makes your image a lot more saturated. So that is something that I really like to do and almost always do on larger images like these foxes. I don't always do a second layer on the tiny images if I don't feel like they need it, or like skinny images like the bow that is right above the first fox. But anything that's large and that you would be able to see the harsh lines that are left behind from swapping marker shades, those are the images that I typically go over with a second layer. I don't always leave it in the video, but this one didn't have too many images and the video wasn't too long, so I decided to leave it in today because I felt like it might be helpful for some of you. If you're coloring your images with just one coat of each shade and you're not happy with the blend that you're getting, you probably need to go over it a second time, and sometimes even a third time. It just really depends on the blend that you're using, and the darkness of those colors as well can sometimes be a factor. So these images, I feel like that orange is quite a dark orange. It's a little bit more of a browny orange, which I think looks a lot more natural for foxes than say like a brighter orange combo like YR04, YR07 and YR09. That's another orange combo that I would use a lot, but maybe not for critters just because it's a more of a bright orange. But yeah, I think, if you're not happy, that's what Copics were made to do. As long as you're using a good quality paper like this Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White, your paper should be able to handle it without bleeding. I did have a little bit of an issue where I went outside of the line, but it wasn't a bleeding issue. It was just not staying inside the lines issue, which sometimes happens when you're in a hurry. So I'm going to finish up this second little image. I did a second layer on him as well, and I did leave a few little parts on their paws to be white just to give them some little white socks. And then I'm going to take my colorless blender and just push back some of that orange that went outside of the lines. Again, that was user error, not a paper issue. It was just me coloring a little bit carelessly around those smaller areas, but it's pretty easy to clean up. Orange isn't too bad to push back, unlike red, which is a bit more difficult. But anyway, I'm going to move on to the white parts of their body now, and I'm going to use E40 and E41. I've been using this combo quite a bit lately for like a creamy tone, and I really like how it looks, especially on critters. It does have more of a natural white tone to it than say like some grays. So I'm going to just add a little bit of that E41 as the darkest, and then I'll take that E40 and blend that out a bit, and I am going to leave some plain white cardstock to be the highlight or third shade in this little combo here. I wanted to add a little bit of pinkness to the insides of their ears and also give them some rosy cheeks. So I went with my typical go-to, which is R11 and R20. Started with the R20 and blended that out with the R11 just to add a bit more, I don't know, pep to them. It gives them a little bit more of a cheerful look. So then I wanted to move on to the little top hat that the boy fox is going to be wearing. He's going to be my balloon seller. And I decided to go with like a rich brown. I felt like that would go really well with the foxes. I thought that black might be a little bit too stark in this situation. So I went with E43, E44, and E47. Since I already used some of the E40s for the white parts of the fox, I thought that this brown combo would just tie in really nicely with that. So I put my darkest, the E47, on the right hand side, since the hat will be tipped a little bit in that direction later on when I put it on his head. And then I'm blending toward the left with the E44 and then using the E43 for a highlight. And again, because it was those darker, richer colors, I did do a second layer just to make that look a bit more seamlessly blended. And then I'm going to move on to a nice dusty teal, and I'm using BG72, BG75, and BG78, and I'm going to color in the hat band with those shades. And because that dusty teal is represented twice in that background pattern paper, there is that darker dot, and then there's also a lighter version. I wanted to have one of the balloons be the shade. I was a little bit afraid to start with the BG78 to begin with. I thought I might have a hard time blending that out because I know that the BG72 is much more filled with the colorless blender, and so when you're working with the extreme darks and lights, sometimes it can push the color outside of the lines. So I started with the BG72 just to kind of get the paper ready for blending, to get some wet surface going on there, and then I came in with the darkest and then added the mid-tone and the highlight. And then I'm moving on now to the hot pink polka dot that's in that confetti background, and I chose RV13, RV14, and RV17 for that. I'm going to use that to do the little bow for the girl fox. It's going to be her birthday in this little scene, and she'll be choosing a balloon from the balloon seller. So I wanted to represent that in the little cluster of balloons as well. So I chose the one directly under the dusty teal, and I'm going to start with the RV17. I'm going to do all my shading for these balloons on the lower right and then have the highlight on the top left. So I added that mid-tone, and I'm working my way toward the top left now with the highlight shade, which is the RV13, and just carefully filling that in so it doesn't bleed into any of the other balloons. Then I'm moving on to that lime green polka dot in the background, and I'm going to do another balloon with that. I decided to do the one on the far right. So I started with the YG25, but I always forget that the YG23 is actually a bit darker than the YG25, even though the caps are reversed and the numbers are reversed. So I went back and added a bit of that YG23 and then blended out with the YG25, and then I'm filling in with the YG21. But because there is a big difference there, I did go back with a bit of that YG25 and the YG21 to just help that blend a bit more. And then I wanted to pull in that kind of bright yellow polka dot. So I'm going to do the little bow that is tying the balloon strings together. And I chose Y13, Y15, and Y17 for that. And then I'm also going to do another balloon. So I just picked the next one in the cluster next to the dusty teal and above the hot pink. And I'll start with the Y17 and then blend out with the Y15 and fill in with the Y13 for the highlight. Then I wanted to represent that lighter dusty teal, and so I started with BG70, which is a very soft teal color. I often use this for like fairies' wings or stuff like that, jars, things that are a bit transparent. And then I added in some BG72 and started to blend that back out. I even decided to do a little tip-to-tip action because there's so much colorless splendor in that BG70 that it's just a little bit tricky to blend. I went back with a bit more of that BG72, just trying to make it look as dynamic as the rest of the balloons, but it really did need a third shade, so I went back and grabbed the BG75 and just pulled a little bit of that from the marker using the tip of the BG72 to add in that third shade, and then continued blending, and I was much happier with that. And then for my final balloon, I decided to do the light pink polka dot in that background. So I went back to my R11 and R20 that I had used on my fox's cheeks and ears, and I added in the R000 for the highlight. So I started with the R20, blended up with the R11, and then filled in with the R000. And then I grabbed my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and got that going off to the side and went over the eyes of my foxes to make them nice and bright and shiny again. This just brings them a bit more to life. It's an extra step, but I really enjoy how it transforms the images. And then I trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm using a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and I'll be adding some Distress Oxide ink in Speckled Egg and blending that onto the background using a Lawn Fawn Cloudy stencil. This blue tone has a bit of a grayish look to it, so it went a lot better with that pattern paper with that dusty teal, especially the pale version of that. Because I felt like a bright blue or even like a tumbled glass would have just been too blue to match with that pattern paper, but I think this Speckled Egg works really well. So I'm going to blend that onto my panel and just continue to work my way down, changing the direction of that stencil each time so I get a different cloud formation so it looks a bit more natural and it's not just repeating the same exact pattern over and over. And then once I have that third hill, I am also going to add a bit more down at the bottom just to kind of break up that stark white and make it match the rest of the background a bit more. Then I'm going to take the MFT Drifts and Hills stencil and I'm going to add that down at the bottom and sponge on some Twisted Citron Distress Oxide ink. This time I'm kind of starting on that stencil and pulling the ink down toward the bottom of the panel. And then I'm going to add one more shade, and that will be Mowed Lawn, just to kind of brighten that up a bit, since the Twisted Citron is a more yellowed of a tone of a green. So adding a bit of Mowed Lawn into that, it just brightens things up, and I think it makes a nice look, even though that darker green isn't in that pattern paper. But having that bit of Twisted Citron in this combo, I think helps it work with that pattern paper. So once I'm happy with that, I'm just going to cover up the grass portion and down at the bottom. And then I want to do a little bit of splatter detail just to create some more movement in that background. So I'm pressing that Speckled Egg Distress Oxide ink onto an acrylic block, adding just a touch of water to that to make it a bit more fluid. And then I'll mix that up with a fine tipped paintbrush and splatter that all over the back to create a nice bit of movement there and just more interest in that background. And then I wanted to add just a little bit down at the bottom too, where the stencil had covered, so it looks complete. And then I'll set that off to the side to dry. In the meantime, I'm going to take the Hello Bluebird Gallery Frame #1 die, and I'm going to die cut that out of our pattern paper for the inspiration. And I also cut it out of a piece of just cheap white cardstock, so I can glue that together later to create some more stability. But for now, I'm going to work on my sentiment, and I am using one of the sentiments from Balloon Buddies. I'm stamping in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'm using the one that says "Today is all about you." I stamped that down twice to make sure it was nice and bold, and then I'll set that aside to dry as well. And in the meantime, I'm going to work on the inside of my card. So I'm using some Lawn Fawn Speckled Eggshell cardstock. It just has a little bit of a creamy tone to it, which I think goes well with the foxes. And I'm going to stamp in Pumpkin Spice ink. And I'm pulling some images from the Word Buddies Woodland, a little fox and a birthday card. And then the sentiment Happy Birthday is from Balloon Buddies. So I stamped that down a few times to make sure I had a nice impression. And now I am ready to start assembling. And I'm going to start by adhering my background to my card front. And I have been away for 12 days on vacation, so in the meantime my glue wasn't being used constantly, so it was a little backed up. So I'll probably have to take off the nozzle and run it under some hot running water to clear that out a little bit later. But for the meantime, I got it going enough to be able to use. So I'm going to add that pattern paper right over the white frame, and that just makes it a little bit stronger, a little bit more firm, so that I can add some foam tape to the back of that. And then I'm going to peel off those release papers and pop that up on my card front, making sure that that sentiment is nicely justified in that top left corner. I'll smooth that down, and then I can bring in my images. I am going to add foam tape to the back of all of my images so that they will be popped up as well. So I'm going to start with my largest image. That's usually what I do. And I'm going to use that balloon cluster to kind of frame in the other part, the bottom corner of that sentiment. I'm not pressing that down just yet though, because I want to make sure that I have my balloon seller fox positioned just right before I adhere that balloon cluster down, so I can adjust that as needed and make sure that it looks like those strings are going in his hand. And then I'm going to add the second little part of those strings and just tuck that under his hand. And I'll use the little yellow ribbon to kind of tie the whole bundle together. And again, my glue got clogged, so I really will have to clean that out. But I do love this glue, and normally if I use it continuously, which I do pretty much use it almost every single day. I don't have any problems with it clogging up. I think it's just because it sat so long being unused. But I'm going to tuck that bow back behind the fox's hand to make it look like it's tied on back there. And then I'm going to add the top hat as well. I added some foam tape to the part that would be above his head and liquid glue to the part that goes over it. And then I have my little birthday fox, and she's going to be standing in front, kind of holding on to one of those balloon strings, picking out the one that she wants for her birthday. And I'm going to add the little hair bow to her as well. Just kind of figuring out which direction I wanted that to go, and finally settled on one. So I'll just adhere that down. And then of course I had to add some glitter. It is my favorite embellishment. So I took my Stardust stickles and I'm going to add just a bit to each of the balloons, mainly on the bottom right side where the darkest shadow is. So I'm just squeezing out a tiny amount and then using the tip of the nozzle to spread that around and kind of keep it constrained in that darkest shadowed area. And that way it'll just really pop against that darker color and look super gorgeous when you tip it into the light. My Stardust stickles was getting clogged as well, so I had to use the needle of my glue to just kind of get that flowing again 2 times. But I added it to all of the balloons and then also to the hat band and the hair bow. So I'll pick that up to the camera so you can see what I mean, how much that catches the light and just sparkles. And I'll give you another peek at the inside as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you'd like any of these products for yourselves, you'll find them listed and linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.